Welcome to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, my guest is Hugo Philion, who is the co-founder and CEO of Flair Network. Hugo, thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, good to meet you, Ricardo. I'm great, thanks.
Nice to meet you as well. Hugo, I usually start these podcasts off with a pretty simple question, which is, for those who aren't familiar with Flair Network, what is the project? Can you describe it for us?
Absolutely. Flair's a layer 1 EVM smart contract blockchain. It has two core protocols that make it different to other layer 1 smart contract blockchains. And those are native interoperability protocols. Firstly, what we call the Flair time series oracle, which is a way to get probabilistic data onto the Flair network. So at the moment, the data that's coming onto the network is prices of various assets. At the moment, crypto assets, but could be any price. But it can be any kind of data that moves over time. So a data series such as weather, some kind of index like a stock market index, really any piece of data that moves over time. So the FTSO is a highly decentralized oracle, and it leverages the Flair token for safety. And the way it does that is that essentially we have what we call an FTSO data provider, and each data provider provides an input to a data series. In fact, each data provider provides an input to every data series. And token holders, Flair token holders, can delegate to a data provider, and that gives that data provider a weighting in the calculation. And so it's kind of a bit like Flair's proof of stake system, whereby essentially we're using the native token to give security to a price oracle. So that's the first protocol. The second protocol is what we call the state connector. The state connector allows the network to essentially come to consensus over what has happened on another blockchain or indeed potentially on the internet. And that's quite interesting. It has a binary forking protocol, which allows us to escape the essentially the constraints of proof of stake. So we can dig more into the state connector as we go through this call.
In your opinion, why is it so important to have interoperability between different blockchains?
So for me, it's not just important to have interoperability between blockchains. It's also really important that blockchains can get data from other sources, not just blockchains. So Flair is based very much around giving developers access to as much information as possible, whether that's price data from the internet or other types of data from the internet. So firstly, we think that giving access to this wide variety of data gives developers the ability to build much more interesting applications that people want to use. One of the things that is quite complex at the moment is that so many of the applications are very constrained by what can be done on a blockchain because they have relatively sort of limited access to external data. We think if we can give developers much greater access, so for instance, access to Twitter, access to social media, access to potentially to databases, we think that can be that can lead to some extremely interesting applications. So that's the first thing. I don't just think it's important for blockchain interoperability. I think it's important for how developers build applications. But specifically to your question about blockchain interoperability, got lots of different networks at the moment. Ethereum, Cosmos, Polkadot, Solana, and the rest, Avalanche, and all that kind of stuff. You've got many people, participating, let's say, in DeFi across those networks, all with various different, essentially reward systems and essentially interest rates. If you think about all the different blockchains as different countries with their own native token, let's say like the Japanese yen and sterling and the US dollar, the euro. And at the moment, essentially there isn't a fantastic decentralized way to be able to, if say for instance, one chain is offering a much higher interest rate, there isn't a great decentralized way to move funds across. and there isn't a great decentralized way to be able to essentially make applications that can sit across all of those platforms at the moment. There are some sort of early efforts to do it with, in our minds, substantial risks, but we think that essentially strong decentralized interoperability creates a sort of harmonization of interest rates, essentially makes a much better financial system, much more liquid, with substantially better characteristics for people taking part in them.
You kind of briefly touched upon the FTSO. Can you discuss, without getting too technical, how the data is gathered in a decentralized way and how it still remains like accurate and reliable?
Of course. So as I said, we have what's known as a data provider. A data provider is essentially a node run by an entity. That can be one person, it can be a company, it can be sort of any entity that wishes to partake in it. Every 3 minutes, there's what's called an epoch. An epoch is essentially where where the network asks the data providers for an update. The data providers give that update, and the data is then calculated. So every 3 minutes, each data provider essentially submits a batch of information. So at the moment, we have 12 prices running on our Canary network Songbird. So one of those prices is Bitcoin USD, for instance. A data provider will submit a price for that together with a random number. And each data provider will submit their price and a random number. And then the system takes essentially what we call the weighted median, which is weighted by how much delegation that the token holders have delegated to a specific data provider. And that essentially allows this set of different information to converge to a single piece of information, the weighted median. And then providers that are within that weighted median are rewarded. The system is going to develop over time such that the weighted median has a band around it, which allows essentially more providers to be rewarded. At the moment, it's a very strongly sort of winner-take-all type of system. We want to make it a slightly easier. So we're seeing within the FTSO that it's extremely decentralized, meaning that it has, at the moment, we have more than 80 providers. So relative to other Oracle systems, that's highly decentralized. It's also our back-tested data. When we look at the data, it's substantially more accurate than any major Oracle provider out there. And importantly, it's providing essentially a payment to the Oracle providers such that they can cover their costs and make a small profit for taking part in the operation. So we want to keep it decentralized, we want to keep it accurate, and we want to keep it honest.
You mentioned the Songbird Canary network. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, so Flair is a complex project with some quite novel protocols. It also has a very large community, as we did what may be the largest token distribution, at least that we're aware of, in a very long time. We wanted to give an opportunity for us to test those protocols with real value, and for our community to get to grips with those protocols without in essentially what you might think of as a beta kind of environment. So with real value, but with a kind of health warning that says this is a beta environment. Please do be cognizant that things can go wrong. So we started a Canary network that we call Songbird. For obvious reasons, it's called Songbird. Canary is a type of songbird. It also fits in with the kind of Kusama ideas that Polkadot were at the forefront of, which was they were one of the first people to have a Canary net. So we're using the Canary net to test the protocols, such as the FTSO, the State Connector, and any other protocols that we deliver from the main company. We also encourage developers to launch their applications on Songbird first. so that the community can get to grips with it, so that bugs that are found in an application, are being tested live with real money in a beta environment. So that's kind of the role of Songbird. Songbird also has a role in governance. Flair has a bicameral governance system. What that means is that if the community want to be able to essentially put forward a governance vote that alters some aspects of Flair, they have to put that governance question on Songbird. Every quarter, so 4 times a year, there's a governance, I guess you call it process, whereby there can be as many governance votes as you like submitted, and then people stake to that governance vote with their Songbird. The winning vote then essentially passes Songbird as if a bill has passed, say, the House, and is then sent up to Flair as if it was going from the House to the Senate. There's then a vote on Flair as to whether it passes or fails. So that's kind of the role of Songbird. And most importantly, because both Songbird and Flair have the state connector protocol embedded in their code, they can have high levels of interoperability. So you can move tokens across. If someone builds a bridge using the state connector protocol, which is quite simple to do with the state connector protocol, you can have essentially a token bridge between the two, which is highly safe. But you can also pass data between the networks, which means you can have interoperability between dApps on Flair and Songbird. So essentially, Songbird, as well as being the Canary net, is the first, I think you might say, we would call it a constellation net within a multi-chain environment.
Okay. And to expand on my last question about Songbird, I noticed on the website you guys also have a couple test networks called Costin and Costume 2. What role do those play?
This is for testing. For us, this is for testing protocols before we want to put them in a live money testing environment, which is Songbird. So this is just testing the actual code, making sure they don't obviously break anything. So there's sort of a pre-test, then they go to Songbird to see how the protocol actually works with real money, because there's a huge gap between concept and actually the game theory that actually happens. And so that's why for us, it's very important that we have a real money testnet, because we not only have to test the code, but we have to test the assumptions around the game theory that the protocol is actually going to work. And to give you an example of that, we're already making substantial governance-based updates to the Flair Time Series Oracle, the FTSO, based on the operation that it has been through over the last year and a quarter since it was launched on Songbird.
Why did you guys decide upon using the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine?
At the moment, really, there are a few virtual machines out there. Solana uses Rust, Cosmos has Wasm, but the Ethereum virtual machine is essentially the equivalent of Windows in the 90s. What does that mean? That means pretty much, the entire developer base in the space knows how to use the EVM machine, and that's fantastic. That also means for Flair that any existing application can be extremely quickly deployed on the network, such that it can be used with anything that comes to our network that's new, that relies on our new functionality. It can be deployed alongside that, and hopefully that leads to interesting composability effects.
You've mentioned the FTSO and how the oracles are more performant than other oracle systems. What kind of benefits does Flair offer to blockchain developers that want to, say, build a dApp on the Flair network?
So to recap, Flair is layer 1 EVM smart contract blockchain, has 2 protocols. The first is the FTSO, which is a highly performant price oracle. Could be used for other things like weather data, indices, that kind of thing. Second protocol is the state connector. State connector allows Flair to understand and securely come to consensus over information from other blockchains and potentially from the internet. So price, internet data, blockchain data, all in one place with smart contracts. The benefit really to that is you're able to build applications with safe pricing and with data from other blockchains and potentially from the internet. We think that that leads to substantially better applications. So to give you some examples, bridging is something that is quite an interesting way to use those set of protocols. We have put forward bridge design called F-Assets, which uses collateral on Flair to be able to, in an extremely decentralized and trustless manner, move assets from a blockchain like Bitcoin, so a non-smart contract blockchain where you can't operate a locking and burning mechanism, from Bitcoin, XRP, Doge. So you're using collateral on Flair to secure the issuance of essentially a mirrored asset on Flair. That's say, for instance, an example of how those protocols can be used. Another developer is building like a relay system, which allows essentially a set of relay nodes to be staked on Flair, and for those relay nodes to relay between any chain. And then if one of those relay nodes becomes dishonest, anyone can put an attestation onto Flair that shows that a relay node, for instance, say between Polkadot and Cosmos, has put information, that has moved information between those chains that was incorrect. The stake connector can then be used to prove that that was incorrect, and they can be slashed based on the outcome of the stake connector. So bridging, relay. We've put forward another bridging design called Layer Cake, which allows essentially smart contract tokens to be moved between different smart contracts with an element of insurance. We can then essentially trigger the insurance payment, again, using the stake connector. Another example might be, let's say you want to find a way to monetize Twitter. You want to create what might be thought of as an advertising campaign. With the stake connector, if with the internet capabilities in the stake connector, it's possible for you to have, say, a hashtag tweeted by a particular address, particular handle, let's call it. You can have that attested to Flair to trigger a micropayment based around an advertising campaign. We think that that can go further into things like gaming, into social media. We're very interested in how Flair can act as a monetization layer for existing Web 2 products in the Web3 environment. As we shout out to developers, we have a foundation, we have a grants program, we have a VC sort of element where we'd be interested in making investments in the best people to come to us. We're very interested in making grants to the right developers with the right products. With two types of grant. We have what we call a community grant and a strategic grant. A community grant is for smaller projects that benefit the overall experience of Flair. So for instance, an example for that might be defining a new event that the stake connector can come to consensus over. So it might be a transaction type on a particular blockchain. That kind of work, that doesn't lead a developer to build a business around that necessarily, but it increases the surface area of Flair. So that's a community grant, and that's kind of a smaller grant. And then we have strategic grants for people that want to build large-scale applications on Flair. So we're very interested in talking to, we have many developers already working on Flair. We're very interested in talking to many more.
I wanted to kind of touch upon the FLR token. Can you explain what role the FLR token has in the Flair ecosystem?
Yeah, so FLR right now is used to delegate to the FTSOs. So it's used to secure the FTSO system. Over time and after we exit beta, so at the moment we're in beta mode for 9 months. After that, there will be a staking-based system whereby FLR is, we keep the delegations to FTSOs, but there'll be an element of staking to those FTSOs who will become validators on the network. So it's a combined staking and delegation token. So delegating to the FTSOs, and also staking to the FTSOs that are that want to run a validator. So that's the sort of first role of the token. The second role is that it's a governance token, so you can use it to express your opinion on a governance vote, which will generally be a change to the network. Most importantly, it can be used in multiple roles at the same time, because it's you can put the token into what we call the wrapped Flair contract, and that allows you to simultaneously delegate whilst having your token in an application. For instance, something like a DEX or a lending protocol or that kind of thing. So it means that you don't have to make a choice between earning the delegation return and putting your token into some form of let's say DeFi protocol. So that's the core use of the asset. It can then also be used as collateral in various bridging mechanisms or any kind of insurance mechanism. Obviously, we've put forward several bridge designs, and those are likely getting built out by various builders on the network, and that's sort of another use case for the asset.
I wanted to touch on the delegation while you're currently using the token, like on another platform. Like, say I'm trading on a decentralized exchange and I lose my token somehow. What happens to my delegation rights at that point?
So if you lose your token, well, your rights would extinguish as they go with the token.
Okay. Do they get transferred to like the new owner, I guess?
Whoever gets the token has those rights to delegate. So ultimately, the way delegation works is actually as follows. You would take your Flair, you would send it to the application. The application can then wrap it for you, or you would deposit wrap Flair into the application and then delegate on your behalf. So the way it would then work is that ultimately the returns from that application would be enhanced through the delegation. So it's not that you keep the token in your wallet, you're still moving your token to the smart contract. It's just that the smart contract is able to delegate on your behalf and then redistribute those earnings for you.
Okay, cool. Thank you for clearing that up. Can you briefly discuss the tokenomics for the FLR token and how the token was issued?
Absolutely. We have an initial supply of 100 billion, of which the community is getting, I think it's around 52% straight, off the top, but we're only distributing 15% of that on day one. So 15% of what's going to the community is distributed at day one. So that's around 4.27 billion tokens. The remaining 85% is then likely to be distributed after a governance vote that is likely to approve what we call FIP01, so Flair Improvement Proposal 1. And if that governance vote passes, which I expect it to, the remaining 85% of the distribution to the public is then distributed to anyone that wraps the token. We're using wrapping here as a proxy for delegating to the FTSO. So people would then wrap their token. There'll be random block sampling, which we would then calculate how many wrapped tokens an address holds. We would then base the monthly distribution on the sum of that number, and you as the token holder would get the pro rata amount. So over 36 months, we're distributing the remaining 85%, most likely, assuming the governance vote passes, to those that wrap the Flair token.
While I was reading about Flair to learn about it and prepare for the interview, I noticed that you guys had validator nodes and then there were observer nodes. Can you kind of discuss the difference between the two and why somebody would want to run a node on Flair Network?
Oh, sure. Validator node is essentially, as most people know, it's involved in consensus. An observer node is pretty common across the industry. It just allows you to essentially access the network, have your own endpoint, get transactions into the network with greater security, greater throughput. You're not having to pay someone else to do it, or you're not going to get rate limited. So if you're running infra on the network, but you don't want to be a validator, running an observer node is extremely necessary. So for instance, pretty much all of the FTSOs that are operating on the network are running an observer node. All of the wallets that are operating on the network should be running an observer node. All the exchanges that are operating on the network should be running at least an observer node, if not a validator. Currently, the validation is limited to a set between the Flair Foundation and a number of professional infrastructure providers. When we come out of beta, that will transition to a staked validation system.
What role do you see for Flair Network in the wider Web3 ecosystem? I know you guys said you had like 12 pairs on Songbird right now. Are you guys planning on implementing like all these other Web3 chains that are out there?
So not necessarily all of them. Not all of them are interesting, but we're certainly interested. So the first use of the pricing that comes from the FTSO system, the first real use case we envisage is that bridging system that I mentioned earlier, which is a collateralized position on Flair that allows for, say, for instance, Bitcoin or Dogecoin, a non-smart contract asset, to then be essentially issued on Flair and used in DeFi. So it's one of the first things we want to do. In order to get assets like Ethereum or other smart contract assets onto Flair, it's not necessary to have that collateral position. We have a different bridging design that we've put forward there, which has an insurance element. You may want to, if you wanted to provide that insurance, let's say in multiple types of collateral, then a price would be useful there. But if that insurance is provided, say, in the underlying collateral, let's say you're bridging ETH, if that insurance is provided in ETH, you don't need the price there. So the pricing mechanism allows you to do one type of bridging, but it also allows applications to use those prices. Or potentially, to do more sophisticated things like create some form of sort of betting application around those prices, bring in other prices, say, for instance, financial data. You can start collateralizing against that, or having some kind of position against, say, a stock price. So derivatives is a feasible use case for that FTSO system. Yes, we will be looking as a kind of interoperability network. We will be looking to integrate with as many quality chains as possible, but not necessarily all of them.
Hugo, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you feel is important for the listeners to know?
Probably sort of how they take part. We have a depth of great resources. We've got some great documentation for delegating the token. That can be done through something like OKX wallet, OKX Web3 wallet, MetaMask. If you use hardware, MetaMask, and your hardware device, there's great delegation guides on our network. We also have developed with an external team that is part of our sort of wider organization a really great mobile wallet called Bifrost, which allows you to delegate directly from the wallet. So it's kind of one of the things I want to sort of impress upon token holders is that we've tried to make it extremely easy for you to take part in the network, to secure that pricing mechanism, which makes the network better overall and gives you a return for doing so.
You mentioned that you want to work with a lot more developers. How can developers get involved?
Read our docs, come to our Discord. We're pretty active on Telegram. We're pretty active on Twitter. Reach out to our community members, and that's sort of broadly the best way to do it. As we said, we have grants available. We have a grants link on our website, so you can submit a proposal, I think at the moment via email. Eventually we'll turn that into a web form. We want to make it as easy as possible for developers to come to us, and we're really interested in your ideas. We think that we've got a set of functionality, essentially a set of tools that gives utility that no one else offers in the space, and we'd really like to help developers take that, raw utility and turn it into a great product.
Thank you. Well, Hugo, I appreciate you coming on the show and answering all my questions. It's been a pleasure discussing it with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo. And have a great day.
You too.